Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening. My name is Asim Qureshi, and I'm here in my role as an independent consultant for Riverway Law in terms of this application that we, alongside my colleague here, Fahad Ansari, have submitted to the Home Secretary to deprescribe Hamas. So Fahad has been leading on the project alongside our two barristers, Frank McGuinness and Daniel Gruters. So there's been a lot going on. Unfortunately, yesterday we wanted to do one of these lives. It didn't exactly come off like we hoped. There was a lot of technical issues. We did try to do something on Instagram, and we got some points across, I think, but it was a bit difficult. But we have an opportunity today to make up for that, to talk through some of the process itself, because I think right now one of the questions that I've been getting from a lot of people is, Fahad, what is the process right now? You submitted this application. What does that mean for the Home Secretary?
Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah, sallallahu. So alhamdulillah, yesterday, after 12 months of work, if not more, we finally submitted an application to the Home Secretary to take our client Hamas off the list of prescribed or banned organizations in this country. We lodged that with the Home Secretary. She now has to look at the arguments, the legal arguments that we've made in those submissions, and she's got 90 days or 3 months to make a decision on this. She can grant the application, in which case she accepts our arguments, Hamas is no longer a banned organization, or she can refuse, in which case we have to take it to the next level. We appeal it to the specialist tribunal.
Right. Well, what does that tribunal look like?
That tribunal is something called the Prescribed Organization Appeals Commission. So it's a 3-man panel. You'll have a high court judge in it. You'll have a judge specializing in immigration and nationality law, and you'll have a member of the MI6. So who they call the lay person.
But there are other options to appeal after that as well, though, right?
Yeah, if you lose on that, then you go to the Court of Appeal. If you lose there, you always have the European Court of Human Rights.
Okay, so there are lots of opportunities.
It's a long process.
How many years are we talking about here?
It all depends, really. I mean, it could take, depending on what stage you resolve it, if you're going to go all the way to the European Court, it could take 6-7 years.
Right. But I think based on conversations that we've had over the last 12 months, I think one of the things that we feel very confident in is the strength of argument within the application. Because, let's remind ourselves here, we're talking about, over 100 pages of a legal submission, and then 700 pages of expert evidence that have gone into this. There's been a lot of thought that's gone into, what the applicable law actually is. So as far as you're concerned, do you think that the Home Secretary has any route out of doing anything other than granting in our favor?
Well, as you said, it's very well supported with the evidence. You have 20 of the most prominent experts on this issue have supported the application for deprescription, including Professor John Dugard, who is an ex-ad hoc judge of the International Court of Justice and currently representing South Africa in the case against Israel for genocide before that same court. You have Professor Avi Shleim, a professor at Oxford University. You've got Dr. Zam Tamimi, you've got Professor Samuel Arayan, and a whole host of experts, including yourself, Asim. And all of these experts have commented on different aspects of the application. But one thing that they're all unanimous about is that our client needs to be deprescribed. It's not so easy for the Home Secretary to just bat that type of evidence away. The legal team that we've assembled for this are barristers who all have a specialism in international law, in human rights law, and are very focused on the issue of the Palestinian question. So with that expertise and that specialism brought together, it is impossible, or what we would say would be unlawful, for the Secretary of State to just simply bat that away without any due consideration. But we believe the arguments are strong. They are grounded in international law. However, it all depends. These are political decisions. What it does require, and we've said this before, is it requires the Secretary of State, a reasonable Home Secretary, to make the correct decision. She needs a bit of courage. The options for Yvette Cooper are very simple. Either do the right thing, deal with some political fallout with your traditional ally, Israel, the one that you have been supporting, the state has been supporting for over 100 years, or 77 years, for Zionism for over 100 years. depart from that policy, because if you don't, what will happen is you're going to carry on seeing dead children on your screens every single day until Gaza is wiped out. There is a real need for courage, a real need for mature decision making, and so we can get to an end of this genocide.
Because I mean, partly, yes, the application is about this banned organization, this proscribed organization, as the language is in the legislation. But actually, I guess the application is about much more than that too, right? Because the arguments really relate around 100 years of a slow genocide of the Palestinian people, their dispossession, their ethnic cleansing, the fact that you have a settler colonization, which is, of course, unlawful under international law. Ethnic cleansing is unlawful under international law. Apartheid is under international law. So what we're really seeing here, and the language in the application that you and the barristers draft is so interesting, because what you say is that you're inviting the Home Secretary to change the course of history in terms of Britain's own role in relation to the Zionist state, because actually, really, even if you don't engage with the arguments around Hamas, there's partly the problem is that Britain is constantly engaging with an ethno-nationalist, racist, apartheid, settler colonial system, all of which is illegal under international law. So how do we have, right now, in the 21st century, an apartheid state that not only exists, but is politically supported, diplomatically supported through aid, through trade, and through the sale of extremely lethal weapons? I mean, if we just take into account some of the weapons that Elbit Systems sells to Israel, like the quadcopters, which play the sounds of children to lure adults out into the open to try and rescue these children, and then they wipe those adults out, right? So these are quite nefarious dealings that our government's been having.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of summed it all up. This is British complicity in a Zionism from the outset has been oppressive. And we're at a position where Zionism is in terminal crisis. It is the end of it. I mean, Israel is a pariah state now. What has happened in the past 18 months is the entire world has witnessed Zionism for what it is. The mask has fallen. Those of us who have been campaigning for Palestine in the past, we've seen all of this. What the application argues in this regard is that this is Zionism. This is the brute, ugly face of the Israeli state. This is what Britain has been supporting for so long. But now, how can we go forward in this regard? How can there cannot be a pre-genocide and post-genocide. They can't be the same. Post-genocide, you have got Israel before the ICJ for genocide. You have its prime minister, an indicted war criminal, a fugitive from the law, that if he steps foot on these shores, there is an obligation on its greatest ally, the UK, to arrest him. Two members of the Labour Party, the government who actually is in charge of this country at the moment, they were denied entry into Israel. So your politicians from either side are not going in. Israel is not what it's going to be. It's never going to be the same. And that's why it is so important that we look at the day after. The state is going to collapse. And who is going to basically take over after that? You will have to have a conversation with people you don't like. With conversation with people who are key to peace and stability in the region. And that our client argues that it is one of those protagonists in this arena. It has to be involved in any discussions.
Right, because when illegitimate priests, sorry, go on.
So I was just going to say that at the moment, because of the prescription, is a criminal offense for Britain, the British government, to actually meet with Hamas because of the prescription. So it has no influence in Palestine right now, something it always maintained until November 2021, when Priti Patel decided to prescribe Hamas.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Priti Patel, actually, because we have seen now some politicians responding to the submission of the application, and she was actually the first last night to really make a very public statement about the application. And she's quite central to all of this, right? Because she's the one who in 2021, kind of like almost out of the blue and seemingly arbitrarily prescribed the political bureau of Hamas. So, the military wing, the Qassam brigades, is proscribed in the early 2000s during the Second Intifada. And, fine, you could say whatever, right? Like, yeah, Britain and Israel are allies. Britain's doing their ally a favor by making the Qassam brigades a terrorist organization, even though the Qassam brigades have never threatened or attacked the UK, which of course was just a bit bizarre. But in 2021, almost out of the blue, we see Priti Patel prescribing the political bureau, which is the diplomatic bureau, which was the bureau that they were supposed to be able to negotiate with. So where did that come from, and why is that relevant to her statement last night?
So I mean, that's really interesting, and I'm not surprised that Priti Patel was the first person to actually respond to this news. Now, I mean, just to correct you, the Izzat-Din al-Qassam brigades were actually prescribed before the Intifada in March 2000. Even before anything had happened, they'd prescribed them. Again, a lot of these prescriptions are political favors they do to other countries, their allies. It's not necessarily because they pose a threat to the United Kingdom. But Priti Patel, what happens is that Britain has always maintained this relationship with a political wing of an organization. It does it to exercise influence, to increase dialogue and negotiations. Britain's learned the hard way from its experiences in Ireland. They've learned from the experiences in South Africa. But for some reason, there seems to be a stubbornness about applying those lessons to the current situation in Palestine. Now, Priti Patel, the application, I encourage all of the viewers to actually read the application. It's on the website, hamascase.com. And in particular, there's an expert report by Professor Avi Shleim who talks about Britain's relationship with Zionism, and particularly how Priti Patel prescribed. And he goes into detail about what happened here, that Priti Patel is a politically compromised character in all of this. Years before that, maybe 2 years before she actually prescribed Hamas, she was the International Development Secretary under the Theresa May government. And unknown to Theresa May, Priti Patel was secretly having meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu, now an indicted war criminal, in Israel. Not just him, but very senior Israeli officials. And what that means essentially is, while she's away on international duty, her boss, the prime minister, does not know that she's actually having these secret meetings with heads of state in another country, an ally country. We don't know what those discussions were, we don't know the minutes of them, we have no idea what was discussed. But what does happen is Priti Patel returns to the UK, she's ceremoniously sacked, and she sort of leaves the political fold. Later on, when Boris Johnson becomes the prime minister, he brings her back in as Home Secretary. In that guise, in this sort of period of time, nothing actually happens. There's no escalation of violence, there's no conflict with Hamas, there's no sort of operation like the 7th of October. And then the sound bites we're getting from Parliament is that the government is looking forward to a Hamas-Fatah unity government. The government recognizes a specific distinction between the political and the military wings. And yet then 5 months later, from the United States, no less, Priti Patel announces that she's prescribing Hamas in its entirety, and there's no difference between the political and military wing. So she doesn't have the best interests of Britain at heart, as Avi Shleim says. And the question raised is, well, whose interest is she acting in? And that's the question now we now present to the current Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is one of your predecessors has clearly made a mistake here, and she's clearly departed from British policy. You're in a position to change that, because what's happened, the implications of that decision are very clear for all to see now in terms of the genocide and the mass criminalization of anybody associated with the last elected government and civil administration of Gaza. And that is why Israel is able, with impunity, to attack hospitals, schools, refugee camps, every aspect of civilian infrastructure, because they simply claim, well, this is Hamas controlled. And of course it's Hamas controlled because Hamas is the de facto government in Gaza. Now that's why we say that, look, Priti Patel has come out very defensively. She hasn't dealt with any of the grounds we've submitted. She hasn't dealt with the arguments we've made. She just said, oh, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Okay, well, yeah, let's move on. Let's stop the genocide.
I mean, she's not the only one though, right? Like yesterday we saw Robert Jenrick make some kind of public statement too. And then just today, even Yvette Cooper this morning, which seems really bizarre. Like you'd think that Yvette Cooper, who is receiving the application, like I'm a fast reader. right? I can read a book pretty quickly, but having read our submission many, many, many times over, I can tell you that it still takes quite a while to get through 800 pages of, very legal sometimes very academic submissions. She's managed to somehow read this, and I'm not even sure if the post would have been received by the time she actually made her statement. Somehow magically managed to read these 800 pages and make a comment by the morning.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So Yvette Cooper this morning on LBC, she was asked about this application. Now let's remember, this application lodged yesterday. This morning, she immediately said that Hamas is a barbaric organization. It's not going to be prescribed. What we call in sort of in legal terms, this is fettering your discretion. I mean, you have a discretion at the end of the day to decide whether or not to do something. Someone submitted evidence to you. Essentially, what you seem to be doing now, what Yvette Cooper seems to be doing, is actually, I'm not going to make my decision regardless of what is in front of me. I haven't read it yet, but I've already made up my mind. I mean, any child will tell you that's simply plainly unfair. At least look at what we've said and give a reasoned decision. But
right, because your client could have turned around and said, right, we completely renounce everything that we've ever done or whatever, just hypothetically, right? They don't say that in the application, right? But they could just say we're sorry for everything happened. We're going to release all the hostages tomorrow, right? We're going to leave and go to Jordan or Egypt or whatever, right? Just theoretically, they could have said all of that in the application, and she has no idea what's inside it, right? So she's making a decision based on vibes. I don't know.
Well, absolutely, and this is the sort of political climate we're operating in. She fears, it seems to me, that the Home Secretary is afraid of the public reaction. She's afraid of what Israel may say, how it might affect relations between the two countries. And this is just pure speculation on my part. What is factual is that she seems to have made her mind up, made a decision that she's not going to deprescribe. But I'm hoping that once she's actually read the papers, there's arguments are very strong that I would believe that any reasonable Home Secretary would make the right decision to deprescribe. I mean, you mentioned Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick's position is the Shadow Justice Secretary. He's also a solicitor, a qualified solicitor. And he today actually attacked the actual application itself. So he said it was, I can't remember the exact word he said, something like sickening. I think he called this application to deprescribe Hamas is sickening. And he questioned our firm's decision to represent Hamas and file this application on its behalf.
Well, I want to get to your representation of Hamas as a client. And you also just mentioned about the public reaction, but, and you said that she's worried about it. But it seems that there is a very significant public reaction that's been very, very positive towards the filing of this application. I mean, it seems that there was only a very kind of loud, small segment that seemed to take umbrage with the fact that this application has been brought, but there seems to be a lot of support for it too.
You often sort of get lost in the Twitter sphere and social media, and you sort of think that's the real world. And so Twitter is full of bots. It's full of it's a cesspit of hate, and you'll see lots of people with negative comments. And we sometimes fool ourselves that that's the real world. In the real world, what my experience has been in terms of the messages and the calls and people just calling up and telling us stuff that this is really great, this is fantastic that you're doing this. People are supportive. I've been getting calls from all over the world. People are supporting this application. They feel that it's something very, very groundbreaking in terms of breaking the cycle of violence. That finally there's something that can actually work towards ending the genocide, bringing about peace and a long-term political solution. That's the real world that we live in. People are actually very happy. They're wanting to offer any way they can help and assist with the application, offering their services. And we say, look, just support the application, right. Talk about the application, talk about the good arguments inside it, if you're happy with it. And what's very, very important is that a lot of these people, that they don't have any support for Hamas.
Right.
Some of them are secular, some of them are left-leaning, some of them are supporting different parties.
To clarify, right? Because that's what this application is about. That you could support the application and the arguments the application is making
without
supporting or expressing support for Hamas itself. Like,
it's completely legitimate to support the application without supporting the organization that is the subject of the application, because they're two different things, right? People might support it for what reason? Because they want peace, right? I might never have supported the IRA in Ireland, but you might have supported, they should have negotiations with them because we're tired of bombs going off, up and down the country. And people would have supported that because of that reason, right? A lot of unionists supported negotiating with the IRA. Do you think that they actually had any subscription to the IRA policies or their belief? Of course not. But they wanted peace. They wanted a settlement. So, it's very important for viewers to understand this. You can support the application. What you must not do, you must not express an opinion or belief that's supportive of Hamas, because until and unless it is deproscribed and taken out of this list, it remains a criminal offense to express support for them.
And of course, we hope that Yvette Cooper, unlike her morning statement, might actually read the application and, judge the merits, or the very strong merits of the application.
And again, I think these are political decisions. We will put in strong legal grounds, but for her to feel comfortable making that decision, she has to understand that the British public are in support of this application. And that will make it easier for her to make that difficult decision.
Well, there have been some noisy voices that have been calling, for instance, for your firm, Riverway Law, to be shut down because you're representing a banned group. I mean, what would you say to them in relation to that?
First of all, in the last 24 hours, I've got about a dozen emails from people who want to come work for me and volunteer for me for free. So that's been brilliant. I could do with some more capacity. But in terms of actually the allegation that the reason they say it is that, how dare you represent Hamas? Now, what they need to understand that within the actual Terrorism Act, it provides for a proscribed group to bring an application to say, hey, you've made the wrong decision. For these reasons, you need to take us off this list. And when I say provides for in the Terrorism Act, what that means is Parliament came together, the MPs just who put this act together, they voted on this. They said, yes, if you're banned, if you are, for example, Hamas and you're banned, you have the right to come and apply to the Home Secretary and say, this is the wrong decision. You need to change your mind. Now, how is Hamas going to do that? These are complex issues of law. They're not lawyers like everybody else. They need representation. So Hamas has instructed a law firm to do this. They're not the first proscribed group to instruct a law firm to get them taken out of this list. And indeed, many have done so successfully. So in that respect, this is not, it's not unprecedented, and it's not unique. So people who are just very angry right now and using that to almost equate me and the firm and the lawyers representing the client with the client are acting really, it's a bit ridiculous, and it's dangerous as well.
It is dangerous. It is dangerous because we have seen, haven't we, that there have been devastating consequences when lawyers are attacked for being activist lawyers, when they're maligned, especially by politicians. Unfortunately, it has a very negative effect. I mean, one of the other elements, right, that I guess you see is this idea that somehow, like, people like you and I are getting rich by bringing a case like this. Having worked with you for the last year on this, I can quite say that this has been like a very much like a
humbling.
It's like digging a hole in the ground and pouring money inside it, right? Like you don't get rich doing this work.
No.
And the reason for that is there of a sanctions regime that's in place. So not only are they proscribed as a group, but they also have a financial sanctions regime on them, which makes it impossible to be funded by them, right?
Yeah. For what the sanctions mean is you can't have any financial transactions with a sanctioned group like Hamas. So I can't give Hamas money. Hamas can't give me money. A third party can't offer to pay Hamas's legal fees. So they can't come and say, okay, you know what, we'll pay your fees, leave them out of it. They can't even pay for our train tickets, or if we want to rent a venue to have a meeting, or any sort of tube fare even. We're not allowed to take any money. That's the sanctions. So all these sort of like tweets and messages going around that these guys are getting rich, they're in for the money, they're on the Hamas billionaires, payroll. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And we checked this. So even when we've realized this is about sanctions, we contacted the Treasury and said, what can we do? Because how do we represent them then? And they said, you need to apply for a license. So when I looked into this license, it's such a long, burdensome and cumbersome process. I thought by the time we get this, it's going to take them at least about a year to get this license. And even then they can revoke it any time. We don't know how it operates. We said, probably better, should we just work without payment? And I said, with the Treasury, can I work without payment without breaking the law? And they said, of course you can. And then just to double check, I commissioned a specialist advice. I'm already losing money now. I'm paying a barrister to tell me I can't take money from these guys, but you can work for free. Right. So then we were then working for free. So the last 12 months, not just us, myself, you, Frank, Daniel, but the 20 experts, they've all done their work for free as well because we can't pay them. So this is the reason we're working pro bono. Not because we've any ideological association with our clients. I mean, none of us could survive if that's the case. The reality is, we're lawyers. These are clients. It's an important issue of law. And again, I think what unified the experts, I seem to get this feeling that they want to see an end to the killing. They want to see an end to the genocide, and they're willing to waive whatever fee they can get to try to get to that space. Right. And really and truly, I think that's something that probably motivated anybody who's been involved in the application.
Absolutely. I guess the last question I have before we wrap this up is one of the accusations as well is that you're effectively trying to support Hamas through the back door by bringing this application. So what can you say to the public about that?
I mean, I represent all sorts of people. I've represented people who've been convicted of sexual offenses. I've represented people who've been convicted of murder. I've represented people smugglers. I've represented terrorists or terrorist suspects. If I'm going to be equated with every one of my clients' offenses, then I'm a very bad person. But we're lawyers. We take on cases, difficult clients. But you cannot equate a lawyer's views with those of his client.
Right.
It's as simple as that. We're doing a job at the end of the day, and it's a convention that you do not equate. As we said, it can get dangerous if you do these type of things, and it's happened with tragic consequences in the past. So we would say, if you to our viewers can help us, or if you see people making those type of arguments, please try to correct them. That you do not equate a lawyer's views with those of his client. It's like a doctor, for example. Doctor is required by the Hippocratic Oath to treat anybody who comes into their surgery. You can't say, well, I'm not going to treat this person because he's a Zionist. Of course not. No, or he's an Islamist, or he's Hamas, you will treat them because that's your job. And I often remember Dr. Hassan Bayev, he's smart because you remember it too.
The Chechen doctor.
The Oath. So
yes,
he's a Chechen doctor who found himself on the front lines in the field during the Russian sort of genocide in Chechnya. And he found himself getting in difficulty with both sides because the Chechen fighters would say, why are you treating these Russian soldiers who are exterminating us? And the Russians would accuse him of being a terrorist sympathizer because he was treating some of the Mujahideen. So you have this sort of, he said, I'm a doctor. My job is to treat everybody. That's my job. And so I would say, look, we're lawyers. We represent everyone. You should not ever equate our views with those of our client.
Look, really thank you for taking the time to explain all of this. We really have to end it there, I'm afraid. But I think one of the reasons why it's extremely important that we have these live sessions each night is that the situation is moving quite quickly. There's lots of noise out there in the public space about this application. People have a lot of misgivings and misunderstandings, and actually some of it's quite malicious. So hopefully by having these nightly discussions, what we'll do is help to kind of minimize that noise a little bit so that actually we can have a fruitful discussion, very public discussion about this application and the merits of this application. And it's really the application itself that speaks for itself. Like when you read it, you will see the arguments that are being made, how well structured they are, how they are rooted in international law. And with that, hopefully, we will see a Home Secretary who will understand what those arguments are and rule favorably. So,
get them to follow the channel
and
to get more updates.
yes, so do follow all the Riverway Law channels, the Instagram, Twitter, follow the YouTube page, and we'll keep the updates going. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good night.